Are you struggling with long COVID and wondering if things will ever get better? Meet Reorigin member Stephanie. Stephanie faced years of debilitating symptoms like chronic fatigue and brain fog after contracting COVID, which ultimately resulted in long COVID. Stephanie was once unable to work full time. She was unable to go out with her friends and do the things she most enjoyed. With the help of Reorigin, Stephanie felt renewed energy, optimism, and control over her health. Her transformation is truly inspiring, and I was able to sit down with her and get all the details. Let's dive in.
There's often this comparison between the limbic brain and like inner child work for those who are doing that sort of work, which is recognizing if you experienced a trauma or something of that kind, and there's a part of you that feels more vulnerable, bringing that piece on board and having a relationship with that piece, whether you call it limbic brain or call it inner child or both, has been a huge part of my Reorigin healing. And while I had worked on that relationship before, I had not been able to maintain it with such consistency until the practice of Reorigin came into my life. So that was something that had eluded me through everything else I had tried that finally Reorigin brought.
Hey, Stephanie, thanks so much for being here with me, for being willing to sit down and share a testimonial of your experience with Reorigin so other people can learn if Reorigin is a right fit for them. So I'm so glad you're here. If you don't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and kind of what was going on before Reorigin, what were some of like the main conditions that you were suffering from, and how long were you experiencing all of this?
Sure. Yeah, and it's great to be here. I'm really excited to actually, be able to give some raw to Reorigin. Yeah, so my health condition really started over 15 years ago. I first contracted Epstein-Barr when I was 17. I got mono, and we're pretty sure that that's what started things out for me. And by the time I was in my late 20s, I was beginning to deal with digestive issues and like chronic fatigue, but had dealt with some childhood trauma, so I had a lot of anxiety going on then. And by my early 30s, that's when I had my first real significant health crash. That was about 15 years ago. And so in the long scope of things, it started out as like systemic candida overgrowth, leaky gut syndrome, chronic fatigue, and developed into chronic fatigue syndrome, POTS, and long COVID as well has been added to the mix in recent years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what I'm still contending with now.
Yeah. You have been through the ringer. Can you tell us a little bit about before you got sick? Like, before these things really started to pop up and then started to, kind of develop into what they were before you joined Reorigin. What was your life like?
For sure. So that would have been in my 20s. I was living out in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. And I was full of beans. I was like really enthusiastic, active, just sort of like, my teens sort of probably extended into my 20s, I would say. I was like, working full time. I was physically active. I went to the gym. I did yoga, and I was extremely social. I was always going out to parties and events. There's like a big arts and dance community there that I was part of. We would go camping, we go to festivals. It was sort of utopia for a while there. So I was really socially active, going out all the time, doing lots of stuff.
Yeah.
I had a partner, I had lots of friends, but I was not well, inside. I had dealt with childhood trauma, as I said, and so there's a lot of stuff going on underneath, but I was very well supported at that time and still had a lot of my strengths, physically at that point.
Interesting. Yeah. It's so funny how those things can be bubbling underneath the surface while we are kind of like out and living life and pretending like nothing is wrong. So I'm sure that, I myself can definitely resonate with that. And I know a lot of our listeners and other members at Reorigin too can resonate. So then kind of tell me, like, walk me kind of into early 30s. Like, how did your conditions affect your quality of life? Like, what were your limitations? What was your emotional state? How did it affect work and relationships and all that?
So like initially, it started out as digestive issues. I was experiencing a lot of, different uncomfortable digestive symptoms and fatigue. So I started doing all those cleanse boxes you get at the health food store. I was doing that sort of thing and just noticing that my level of energy was not that of my peers. But by the time I got into my early 30s, I was, I had all that anxiety and stuff and accumulated trauma was coming to a head. Like I wasn't functioning well in my relationships anymore. I still had lots because, I was good with people, but I was struggling a lot. And then I stopped being able to work as much. I just noticed intuitively, like gravitating away from it, like just feeling this is not good for me working as much. And I cut down to part-time. I went through a real crash financially then because I couldn't keep up with things. I went bankrupt in my early 30s and came home to live with my parents. And I started seeing a functional MD. And at that point, it got so bad. I was like, you know, total like consuming brain fog where it was like, blurry vision. And like I'd wake up in the morning, I'd get dressed, I'd eat breakfast, I'd go back to bed, you know. And that was sort of my world in long periods of time lying in bed. I had no focus, no motivation. I felt like crap all the time. And I was only able to really work part-time then ever since, is what it was. And at my worst, I had to stop work for a whole year. And then before and after that, it was part-time. It would kind of increase and then go back down to, depending on what was happening. Friends started dropping out at that point because I was dealing with all that trauma. All I could talk about was my healing process. I was like pretty miserable. I was always optimistic, but I was struggling like a lot. And so people started to distance themselves either because of that, because they didn't have the emotional capacity, or because I just wasn't able to keep up with everything that everyone else was doing. And you just sort of fall out of the rhythm of life, right? And my family had to support me. So I was living at home with them. They were kind of taking some of the extra financial burden. Yeah, covering duties and stuff like that. And I had to change the kind of work I was doing. So I've been able to do like a full-time job, more active, be physical somewhat, be mental the whole day. And I had to reduce all of that, eventually doing less and less physically demanding work and less mentally demanding work. To the point that now I've got to a point of, and in some ways it's good, doing only what really gives me energy, which is usually what you love to do, and within certain compartments, right? Obviously, so that it was energy feeding. So because there was nothing else that could sustain me, basically.
That's an interesting just little nugget that you added in there because I went through the exact same thing. My illness really forced me to like take inventory of the things that were life-giving and the things that were life-sucking. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be easier to look back on that and recognize it as a blessing because when you're in it, you're like, I just want to be normal. So, yeah, I really hear, so much of what you went through. And again, I think it's just so, so relatable. So thank you for sharing that.
For sure.
You also mentioned you saw a functional medicine doctor. What other therapies did you try? How much money did you spend? Obviously, you don't have to tell us any doctors' names or anything, but what was that like?
Yeah. So I tried a lot of stuff, and I would say that my leanings were more in the alternative health thing rather than traditional medicine, because that's where my values are at. But I have this nice. I wrote the list so I can remember everything and just tell it to you. So body detoxification, anti-inflammatory nutrition, supplementation, herbalism, yoga, qigong, meditation, nature therapy, indigenous healing stuff, craniosacral, counseling, energy healing, massage, EMDR, somatic therapy, emotional freedom technique. I'm sure lots of people have tried this who are coming into the programs and
Yeah.
stuff too. Life coaching, acupressure, breath work, vagus nerve technique, sound healing, shamanism. So a lot of those typically alternative things.
Yeah.
Because this is 15 years. It's not like I can be like, yeah, I did that in the last 5 years. This is like a long period of healing. So, but I didn't have much money because I wasn't able to work very much at all. I was barely making ends meet. So what I did was I did exchanges with people. So I was a freelance alternative health practitioner or alternative health writer at the time. So I would do writing for people in exchange for healing.
Wow.
And there was also just a lot of kindness and generosity. People gave me free stuff and a lot of free support. And, there were windfalls, things that just came a little bit here came from this or that. And I just was so committed that sort of doorways opened up. Do you know what I mean? To make things possible.
Well, that's really amazing to hear that you were able to experience that level of generosity. If you could
Yeah.
estimate all of the stuff that you did, could you put a number on it, even just
Oh
guessing how much?
gosh. Well, I mean, to say there were periods of time where I was seeing people, several people a week, three people, imagine three practitioners a week for years, you know? So that's like hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of dollars,
Yes,
thousands and thousands. Yeah.
absolutely. Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. The things that we do, to just try to regain health. Yeah, wow. I'm so glad that there was generosity for you that you
Oh,
were able to
yeah.
manage in that way.
It was kind of miraculous. I feel really lucky, actually.
Yeah, amazing. So then tell me, how'd you find out about Reorigin, and then how did you initially feel about it when you heard about it?
Yeah, so I first learned about Reorigin from my functional MD. He has specialized in helping people with these kinds of conditions that are like what you guys have in the program, and had heard about it and recommended it relative to some of the other programs that are similar because he felt it was more doable because the amount that you had to do the techniques a day, which, otherwise people tend to crash and drop it. You know what I mean? But this was more integratable into regular life, if integratable is a word. You know what I'm saying? And I was excited because I'd already learned I had previously been a coach in an anti-inflammatory nutrition program. And in that, because I was in their program and I graduated into working for them.
Yeah.
And I learned about vagus nerve techniques and nervous system regulation through that. And I already knew that that was a component. Um, but my doctor made me aware that this could be a larger component and that maybe this would be a good direction to take with it. And so that's sort of how I came. And I sort of had an initial hesitation around finances, which was always my limitation. Um, but I thought that the reorigin price was really reasonable given the value because I knew what was in there and it was similar to the program I've been in. So I kind of had a point of reference and I thought it was really accessible. And I had some resources because here in Canada, we have, had financial support because I haven't been able to work full time. And there were some resources I could draw on there to be able to join the program.
Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you were able to make it
Yeah,
work.
me
Um,
too.
so when you first started, you've been in Reorigin for a while. You and I have known each other for a while. When you first started, what was the experience like? What did you like, and what made you stick with Reorigin for as long as you've been in Reorigin?
Yeah. So I, I mean, as soon as I sort of came into the program, it was familiar territory because it was a lot, in some ways, very similar to the program I'd worked in. Although you guys definitely have your different topic and different, you know, flavor, but a lot of overlap in the kind of structure and stuff. And so I knew how valuable that structure was because I'd already worked in one and all participated as a client
Yeah.
in one.
Yeah.
And so I've sort of felt very at home and glad to be back in a healing community again and to try something different. And um, yeah, so it wasn't hard for me to commit, really. As soon as like was observing the coaches, like you were my first coach, and I loved what you had to offer and the wisdom and the experience, and I could tell, you just observing you that you had been there. And same with Ben, you guys had
Mhm.
been there and come through, and that's like the most powerful mentorship there is. So I thought, yep, I'm in the right place. And there's the resources I need are here. So I'm just like, okay, I'm going to stick here until I can do what these people can do, because that's what I did in the previous program of the anti-inflammatory nutrition. And I now eat automatically, pretty much as they do, and it's just habit. So I thought I know the power of being able to do that in a program.
Well,
Um, so so yeah, since I started, I noticed like immediate improvements in my mood immediately, that were very quick, and in my energy and in my sense of optimism. I mean, part of that's the community support, but it was also, yeah, the techniques worked quickly. And there is a bit of as you've told us, like a woo at the beginning, and it kind of levels off, and you
yeah.
got to be committed over the long term. But that was enough to show me it was really working, And So there was a reduction in the anxiety, reduction in overstimulation, improvements in energy, improvements in depression, anxiety, all that stuff. So I thought, yeah, this is really working for me. I also felt a greater sense of personal power and control that had been really eluding me, which I think now I'm realizing was due to the limbic impairment. Because I'd known some of these things, power, you have your thought loops and your mind creates your health and blah, blah, blah. Years. And yet I wasn't able to get there. Like I wasn't able to get behind the wheel and actually take some control. And something about the Reorigin program was allowing me to get that distance. Something about the connection with the body and the scientific approach maybe gave me distance from my feelings or something like that, enough that I was able to see how things were working so much more clearly and what was happening, which really increased my sense of compassion for myself as well. Yeah. So that was the beginning.
So, okay, now tell me about group coaching. You obviously you did a couple of rounds of group coaching. What was your favorite part? And what kept you wanting to join again and do it again?
Yeah. Well, again, as I said before, it was you guys, Katie, you and the coaches' experiences and the mentorship there and all the I could tell from the feedback I was getting that you knew where I was in and where other people were at their point in the journey. So listening to your reflections with me as well as with the other people, um, was super, super insightful for the process of learning how to get my hands around this situation and start to manage it in baby steps. And there was just so much encouragement and lightness, just to be in a group with people, where you're like lifting us up, and by the end, everybody's moods are increasing. This really, really helpful and connecting, and to have people who understand what you're going through and aren't judging you for it because they've been there themselves. All of that was super valuable to me.
Okay, so take a couple minutes. What's your life like now? Where are you at? What's your biggest win so far?
So I experienced like a real turning point when I actually started to realize that I had the power to um, take hold of my health in a new way through the techniques that were being given to me. Because as I said previously, I had not, despite knowing that these thought loops in my mind were the cause of, I ultimately believe that the mind creates what's happening in the body. And although I don't think that you can just switch that overnight with like toxic positivity, I believe there's a very strong connection there. But I hadn't been able to get there, which was really, really hard on my self-esteem, right? I was really struggling with a lot of perfectionism and self-criticism and still do. But this started to really help me increase the compassion, as I said, because I was able to recognize it wasn't my fault, and that there was actually something physiological, biochemical happening here that was making it harder for me than some to get hold of those thought loops and actually make a shift there. And so that when I started to realize what was actually happening and start to feel like I actually had the power to stop it and affect change when I hadn't been able to. That was like a major turning point for me in the course of the program. Yeah. And I felt, a lot of the reflection from the coaches, but also just like the structuring of the videos and all the different aspects of the healing that you guide us through was really helpful in getting to that place. Yeah.
In terms of tangible changes, physical changes, are there things that you're doing now that you couldn't do before? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I would say I was pretty caught and freeze response. And much of my first year was spent just focusing on doing the videos, doing the technique, like learning the technique, joining the momentum group to keep my motivation going, and trying to help myself overcome this freeze state so that I could actually move a bit more and participate in things a bit more. And I'm still struggling with that, truthfully, because I think that ran pretty deep. But um, that was one of the major things is it felt like flow started to happen, almost like there was like a block in the pipes and flow started to come back into my experience. to the point that, I was able to start going out to dance events for the first time in over a decade, like going and dancing for 2 hours. And I would sit down and take breaks and do my long form before and after and stuff. But I couldn't do that before. I couldn't do it. I have to sit down all the time. I didn't feel like dancing. Um, the other thing, I started to increase my physical workload. And that's something I would, forewarn people who join to be careful because I overdid it and I relapsed a bit. But I understand what happened now, which I learned a lot through that experience. It's like, oh, okay, these are the limits I've been crossing with myself my whole life. I'm finally starting to understand where my physical limits are so that I can actually take better care of my body and myself, right? Not over being a chronic people pleaser, overgiver,
Yeah.
self-sacrificer, all of that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of deeper learning as well that was coming through just about things in my life and who I want to be, not just physically. But those were major. And just the sense of optimism, like I said, and the mood shifts, the improvement in mood were significant. But a reduction in symptoms as well. So with this, thing we do in Reorigin where we're minimizing, I was able to, like, every time, and this is not always true for everyone, so I don't want to get anyone's hopes up, but for me, by using the power of my mind and believing in it, I was able to turn the volume down on a lot of the inflammation in my body that was causing some of these symptoms, so that I could, with doing that technique, experience immediate relief is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks. Okay, what would you say to someone who is struggling with chronic illness, who maybe is in the place you were in when you first joined, and they're just considering reorigin? What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, it's, sort of a practical approach is like, I would say consider whether or not a whole range of symptoms you may be experiencing could be down to one thing, which is limbic impairment. That's one thing I would say. Also, consider whether or not you believe in the power of the mind to heal the body. And even if you don't, if you're open to believing that. And if those two things are in place, I e like, you're gonna get something from the program. Like, there's no question to me. Like, even if whether it's for the short term or the long term, there are things that you can get, so much learning. There's so much expertise in there. There's so many techniques in there. There's so many good people who've been through healing experiences in there, that if you're feeling at all drawn, like, by your gut or by your heart, I can't imagine why not to, jump in because there's something there for you. There's something, you know what I mean? And for those who really resonate, like I'm feeling I do, like committing to it for a long haul, it can take time, like to heal. But that dedication feels really important. Um, because we have to do this for ourselves, right? But we don't have to do it alone. So that feels like the important part to say around that. Yeah.
I love that. All right. And then how about someone who might have just joined Reorigin? What's something you might say to them?
Yeah. First thing I would say is maybe don't be intimidated because like it can be very overwhelming when you first come into an online program because there's a lot there and it's like entering a busy stream of information that's like flowing by and you're like, oh no, I'm missing the process, or no, I don't know this yet, or I don't, because you're kind of coming in midway. But if you just go through the steps of the videos, follow the structure they've given, join a momentum group if you can. You're not going to get it wrong. Like you get things, you kind of, magic happens and you get things in the order that you need to get them,
I love that.
And yeah, it can be really straightforward. And also, the thing I said about commitment is really important. You have to commit to yourself and give it a chance and really trust the process, trust the coaches, trust the things you're hearing from other people who are getting results, because it's really important to get that motivation and that openness to change, I think. That's what I would say.
I know something you've heard me say before is that, like, if we're in that place of self-doubt, just to look at the evidence, right? To just go into the forum and look at all the people that are posting and saying that it's working, and just know that, like, this is science. It's not just like this magic woo-woo, like there's actually science to prove it. So look at the evidence. And then I
That's right.
loved the other thing that you said about not, you can't get it wrong, because it's true, right? Like, just interrupting a thought loop is like, you're not going to do that wrong. And I know that helps people that struggle with that perfectionism or that perfection loop. So thanks for sharing that.
Definitely. Yeah.
All right. Okay. How would you explain reorigin to someone who's never heard of it before?
Yeah. So, I'll give you my brief description here, direct, which is Reorigin is a science-based program to support healing physical, emotional conditions founded in limbic brain impairment. It's a kind-hearted, community-based, extensively research-based, valuable, and supportive resource for those hoping to make progress and reclaim a sense of personal power relative to their illness or health condition. That is my formal
I love that. That's perfect.
description. I just wanted to say one more thing, Katie, relative to the last thing that you asked me about, because it feels really important, and which is that there's often this comparison between the limbic brain and like inner child work for those who are doing that sort of work, which is recognizing if you experienced a trauma or something of that kind, and there's a part of you that feels more vulnerable, bringing that piece on board and having a relationship with that piece, whether you call it limbic brain or call it inner child or both, has been a huge part of my Reorigin healing. And while I had worked on that relationship before, I had not been able to maintain it with such consistency until the practice of Reorigin came into my life. So that was something that, another thing that had eluded me through everything else I had tried that finally Reorigin brought. So I just wanted to make sure that I missed saying that.
That's incredible. That gave me chills. That gave me chills. And this is just coming on a personal note as someone who has done a lot of that work and literally refers to her limbic brain as little Katie, because we just have to be, the person for our inner child that maybe we didn't get as a kid. So that's a very powerful insight. Thanks, Stephanie. All right. Anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to say?
Right. Well, I wanted to say, recognize that you can get even more out of the program than you put into it, I feel, because it's like, as long as you recognize that all you need to take are those little baby steps. Because my experience is you give an inch and it gives you a mile. Like you get a lot back, but it is really important to keep maintaining that input. And to participate in the things that are there and available to you, even if you don't feel like it, to try at your own pace, you know what I mean? Because that's where the juice comes out, where you can really extract the juice of what's there. And then, as I said before, just remember, we don't need to do it alone. We have to do it by ourselves, but we don't need to do it alone. Yeah, that was huge for me.
Thank you so much for sharing so much insight and your experience and some of your story. We really appreciate it. And I know that this is going to help someone, if not many, many people out there in the Reorigin universe. So thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Katie.
Stephanie's story is a powerful reminder that healing is possible, even if it feels overwhelming. If you'd like to learn more about the Reorigin program and how it can help you overcome your symptoms of long COVID, make sure to check us out at reorigin.com/program. And if you're in need of more inspiration, make sure to check out Cherry's story of also healing from long COVID, coming up next. Remember, you are not alone in your healing journey, and there is an entire community here waiting to help you heal. Click below to learn more. Your story of transformation could be next.